The galaxy had never seen unity, not truly. Empires clashed across millennia, tearing one another apart with wars that burned entire constellations. Hatreds ran deep. Bloodlines swore vengeance across generations, and no ruler trusted their neighbor for longer than a single breath. But there was one thing every great civilization could agree upon. The humans of Earth did not belong. At first, the great powers ignored them. A primitive species, late to the stars, stumbling like children into a galaxy already claimed by titans. Their ships were weak, their weapons laughable, their lifespans pitifully short. The elders of the cosmos pitied them. Some even found amusement in their stubborn attempts to carve out a place among the stars. Humanity's first colonies were tolerated like campfires burning on the edges of a frozen wasteland. But then the whispers began. Humans did not expand cautiously like the Athari, who moved only after centuries of deliberation. They did not cling to ancestral systems like the Val, who measured time in eons. No, humanity spread like wildfire. Within a few centuries of first contact, they had seeded 100 worlds with cities and children, with minds and ships and ambition. The galaxy, which had always moved slowly, found itself staring at a creature that grew too fast, burned too hot. The whispers turned to warnings. The warnings turned to fear. And fear, when shared by many, becomes unity. The council halls of the great empires filled with ancient voices, each one remembering old scars, old betrayals. Yet even the bitterest rivals set aside their hatred if only for a single cause. They saw in humanity not a neighbor but a storm, unpredictable, uncontrollable, and all too familiar. For in their hunger, their drive, their endless wars with themselves, humanity resembled something every empire had once been, long before they grew complacent. Left unchecked, spoke the Val Primarch, his voice like stone grinding on stone. They will become the death of us all. The declaration was met with silence. Then one by one every empire nodded. And so, for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy stood united. Not in peace, not in prosperity, but in fear of a single world orbiting a yellow star at the edge of a spiral arm. Earth. The fleets were gathered in secret. Dozens of empires pooled resources, ships, and soldiers. An armada greater than anything ever assembled took form in the black. Tens of thousands of warships armed with weapons forged from 1,000 different technologies, all pointed in a single direction. Humanity, busy celebrating its rapid rise, never saw it coming. The first strikes were not battles but executions. Outposts along the rim vanished, their signals cut off mid-broadcast. Colonies screamed into the void, voices begging for help only to fall silent one by one. Merchant fleets were reduced to drifting husks, their crews annihilated before they even understood the danger. From orbit, alien weapons burned cities into ash, skies turned red, oceans boiled, and billions watched their homes disintegrate under firepower meant to slay gods. Earth itself was spared at first, not from mercy but from strategy. The coalition wanted humanity broken before the cradle fell. They wanted the species to watch everything they had built collapse, to understand the futility of resistance. On the ground, the truth sank like lead into human hearts. Families clutched each other in fear. Soldiers clenched their rifles with trembling hands. Leaders prayed to gods they no longer believed in. Humanity's defenses were scattered, outnumbered, overwhelmed. And yet, in those first days of fire and ruin, something unexpected happened. Humanity did not kneel. The world expected them to beg for mercy, to crumble beneath the weight of a united galaxy. But instead, the humans fought. They fought in desperation and fury and grief. They fought with weapons scavenged from burning ships, with strategies born in the chaos of collapse. They fought like animals with their backs against the wall, clawing, biting, refusing to yield even as the darkness closed in. A pilot named Annika Voss rammed her crippled fighter into the bridge of a dreadnought, sacrificing herself to buy time for a convoy of refugees. A colony militia on Carthos III held against a fleet 20 times their size, using tunnels, traps, and sheer madness to delay the inevitable for weeks. On Titan, engineers turned mining drills into weapons, drilling through the hulls of enemy ships in suicidal boarding actions. Every act was small, insignificant in the vastness of war. And yet together they formed something more. A message. Humanity would not go quietly. The galaxy had gathered to extinguish a fire. Instead, they had thrown fuel upon it. Admiral Reyes, then a young officer on the carrier Indomitable, stood among the smoke and ruin of her first battle. Her ship was half destroyed, her fleet shattered. Casualty reports filled her ears like knives. And yet, when her captain asked if she would take command of what remained, she did not hesitate. She had lost family, friends, comrades, but her voice did not waver when she said, "We fight. Even if we're the last ones left, we fight." Her words spread through the survivors like fire through dry grass, across the scattered remnants of humanity's fleets, across broken colonies and dying worlds. The same vow was whispered, shouted, carved into steel and flesh alike. We fight. The galaxy believed it had crushed Earth in its cradle. Instead, it had awoken something it could never again put to sleep. And though humanity stood on the edge of extinction, bloodied and broken, it carried within it a truth older than any empire, a truth carved into its very bones. The storm was coming. And humanity was the storm. The first days of the war had been horror. The weeks that followed became nightmare. The coalition struck with precision born of centuries of interstellar conflict. Their fleets moved like a tidal wave, coordinated across hundreds of species, thousands of admirals, each one following a strategy older than humanity's presence in space. Where humans were scattered, the coalition was unified. Where humans improvised, the coalition executed. Every human colony became a battlefield. On the world of Argos Prime, alien cruisers burned the skies while millions huddled in underground shelters, listening as shockwaves rolled through the earth above them. The defense fleet had been wiped out in less than an hour. The survivors, mostly civilians, could only wait for the inevitable breach. Some prayed, some screamed, others sat in silence, holding hands as the ground shook with every distant bombardment. On Europa Station, the largest civilian habitat in the Jovian system, families tried to board evacuation transports. Only half the ships made it out before alien destroyers descended, tearing the station apart. Children clutched dolls while soldiers fired rifles that barely scratched alien shields. The evacuation commander sent one final message before communications were cut. "We'll hold the docks as long as we can. Save who you can. Don't look back." And on Earth itself, the blue jewel of humanity, skies filled with fear. People watched the stars at night, not in wonder but in terror, knowing that fleets far larger than anything humanity had ever built were moving closer every day. Across governments and militaries, desperation spread. No leader could promise victory. No general could speak of hope. Their forces were too small, their weapons too primitive. Humanity had expected centuries to prepare for threats like this. Instead, they had been given days. But if fear dominated the corridors of power, it was grief that haunted the streets. Every family knew someone who had vanished in the first strikes. Names spread through the networks, missing, dead, gone. There were no funerals, no time to mourn properly. A son lost on Titan, a daughter vanished with her ship over Sirius. A brother burned alive on the surface of Vega 2. Humanity carried their dead not in graves, but in silence. Admiral Reyes, still not yet the legend she would become, walked the ruined corridors of the carrier Indomitable, listening to the voices of her crew. Some whispered about revenge. Others broke down in quiet corners, their grief spilling out in tears they could not hide. She felt the same grief burning inside her. Her son, a Marine on Carthos III, had gone dark with his regiment 2 days before. She didn't know if he was alive. Didn't know if he had died screaming in the tunnels of that doomed colony. She only knew that she could not afford to collapse, not yet. "Admiral," a lieutenant said, approaching her, his voice shaking. "We're losing everything. Out there. It's hopeless." Reyes looked at him, her face carved in lines of exhaustion. She thought of the hundreds who looked to her for strength, of the millions who had no one left to lead them. She could not admit the truth, not even to herself. "It's never hopeless," she said, even though her voice cracked. "As long as we breathe, we fight." The lieutenant nodded, and though his eyes still carried fear, a spark remained. A small spark, but enough, for that was how humanity survived, through sparks. through a soldier holding the line an extra minute, through a pilot refusing to eject, steering her dying ship into an enemy cruiser, through engineers turning scrap metal into weapons, through civilians who refused to run, choosing instead to dig in and fight with whatever they had. The galaxy expected surrender, but surrender never came. Instead, something unexpected emerged in the chaos. Humanity adapted. Alien fleets moved in predictable patterns following centuries of doctrine. Human commanders, unbound by tradition, learned those patterns, exploited them. Small victories appeared among the endless defeats. A squadron of frigates ambushing a cruiser convoy, a militia luring enemy troops into a canyon and burying them beneath rock slides, a lone destroyer detonating its core to cripple a dreadnought. Each victory was tiny, meaningless in the grand scale of war. And yet, they mattered, because they proved that humanity could bleed the enemy. The coalition noticed. Alien soldiers began to whisper of human ferocity. They had expected civilians to cower. Instead, they found farmers strapping bombs to their chests, miners turning drills into weapons, children throwing stones at armored troops. The humans would not run. They would not yield. Even when surrounded, they fought. Even when defeated, they made the enemy pay in blood. The coalition responded with greater brutality. Entire cities were burned from orbit to break morale. Populations were executed to send messages. Refugee convoys were targeted deliberately, every escape route cut off. They believed fear would crush human resistance. Instead, it only deepened their resolve. By the third month of war, the coalition controlled most of humanity's colonies. Earth was surrounded, its defenses strained, its people starving. Humanity should have been finished, and yet, it was not. Somehow, against all reason, humanity endured. Admiral Reyes stood at the shattered command deck of the Indomitable, staring at the star field beyond the cracked glass. Reports scrolled across her console. Losses, defeats, names of the dead, but also something else. Messages from survivors, pockets of resistance still fighting, colonies refusing to surrender. Every line of text felt like a heartbeat. Humanity was bleeding, dying, falling apart, but the heart still beat. She whispered the words she had spoken once before, now to herself, now as a vow: we fight always. And though the galaxy did not yet realize it, something profound had begun. Humanity had lost its colonies, its fleets, its future. But in that fire, in that endless storm of loss, it had found something greater. It had found its will. Admiral Reyes stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her reflection staring back at her from the fractured glass of the forward viewport. Beyond it, the stars burned bright, indifferent to the suffering of a species fighting for its very soul. She pressed a hand against the railing, steadying herself as another casualty report scrolled across her console. Her son's name was among the fallen. Private Elias Reyes, 20 years old, last seen fighting with his unit on Carthos III. The report gave no details, no body, just the word that haunted every family across the stars: missing in action. She wanted to cry, to scream, to collapse. But there was no room for weakness. Not here, not now. Her crew looked to her, their eyes hollow, their faces streaked with exhaustion and ash. If she broke, they would break. So she buried the grief, locked it in the deepest part of herself, and forced her voice into iron. "Status of the fleet?" she asked. A young lieutenant, barely old enough to shave, swallowed hard before answering. "We've confirmed destruction of 27 ships in the last engagement, Admiral. 50% casualties among ground forces. Supply lines are non-existent." His voice cracked on the last word. "We're down to scavenging fuel and food where we can." Reyes nodded slowly. Each word was a blade cutting deeper than the last. But she forced herself to remain calm, to project strength because her people needed strength more than they needed truth. "Then we make do with what we have," she said. "Humanity has never been given more than scraps. We'll fight with scraps if we must." The lieutenant tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Across human space, the same grief played out in different forms. On Earth, families gathered in silence around flickering screens, waiting for updates that never came. A mother in Buenos Aires listened to the last message her daughter had sent from the front, replaying it until the recording degraded into static. A father in Nairobi set an empty chair at the dinner table for his son. A soldier lost in orbit around Mars. On the colonies, survivors dug mass graves, their hands blistered from shovels, their faces numb with shock. Children clung to blankets that no longer smelled of home, staring at skies filled with fire. Priests and philosophers alike were left without answers, their words failing in the face of so much loss. It was not just death that crushed humanity. It was the silence, the unanswered messages, the ships that never returned. The names marked as missing that carved deeper wounds than those marked as dead. The coalition had intended to break humanity's spirit by tearing away everything they loved. And in truth, they came close. Admiral Reyes often walked the lower decks of the Indomitable, moving among her crew. She saw the hollow eyes of engineers who hadn't slept in days, the trembling hands of soldiers who cleaned weapons they might never fire again, the 1,000-yard stares of medics who had run out of morphine long ago. Once, she passed a storage bay where a young Marine sat alone, cradling his rifle like a child. His helmet was off, his cheeks streaked with tears. Reyes paused unseen and listened as he whispered to himself, "I can't do this anymore. I can't, I'm so tired. Mom, I just want to go home." She wanted to step forward to comfort him, to tell him it would be okay. But the words would have been a lie. There was no home to return to. And so she walked away, carrying his pain alongside her own. In that moment, she understood something she had always known but never put into words. Leadership was not about strategy or orders. It was about carrying the weight no one else could. It was about standing tall when every part of you wanted to collapse. It was about becoming the shield that others hid behind, even if the shield was cracked and bleeding. And that shield grew heavier with every name added to the lists. Humanity was breaking. But in that breaking, something new began to take shape. Historians would later write that the third month of the war was when humanity should have surrendered. Their colonies were gone, their fleets shattered, their resources dwindling. Their leaders were ghosts walking among ruins. By all logic, by every precedent written in galactic history, they should have bowed their heads and accepted annihilation. But humanity had never been logical. In the silence of grief, in the ashes of defeat, something stirred. Families who had lost everything chose to fight anyway. Soldiers who knew they would never win still raised their weapons. Civilians who had never fired a gun learned to build barricades, to craft explosives, to bleed for worlds already lost. It was not hope that drove them. Hope was gone, stripped away by fire and steel. What remained was something older, deeper, carved into their bones by 1,000,000 years of survival on a hostile world. Defiance. They fought not because they believed they could win, but because surrender meant extinction. Because to kneel was to dishonor the dead. Because even in grief, even in despair, humanity refused to let go of the one truth that defined them. As long as they could draw breath, they would fight. Admiral Reyes returned to the bridge one night, unable to sleep. The stars glimmered cold beyond the viewport. She thought of her son, of his smile, of the way he used to run ahead of her when he was small, laughing as if the world could never touch him. She thought of all the children lost, all the families broken. And she felt the crushing weight of every soul that looked to her for strength. She whispered into the silence, not knowing if she was speaking to the stars, to her son, or to herself. "I'll carry them. Every last one. Until the end." The words were soft, almost broken, but in them was iron. Because though humanity was drowning in grief, though the galaxy believed they had crushed the human spirit, the truth was far more dangerous. The grief had not broken them. It was sharpening them, and soon the galaxy would learn the price of underestimating a species that had nothing left to lose. The coalition believed it had broken humanity. Its fleets had burned colonies to ash, reduced cities to rubble, and left billions dead or vanished. In the eyes of the galaxy, Earth was finished. No species had ever endured such devastation. No civilization had ever risen after such ruin. But the galaxy did not understand humanity. On Earth, amid smoking craters where cities once stood, survivors emerged from shelters and dug through the wreckage. They buried their dead with hands torn and bloody, then sharpened the same shovels into spears. On Luna, Engineers whose families had perished in orbit turned mining lasers into weapons, strapping them onto shuttles that were never meant for war. On Titan, survivors rebuilt shattered habitats with salvaged scrap, fashioning airless bunkers into fortresses. Everywhere the galaxy expected silence, it heard defiance. The Coalition's admirals dismissed these scattered efforts as meaningless. Small, disorganized, pathetic. What could broken colonies and ragged militias achieve against the most powerful armada in history? The answer came soon enough. At the Battle of Vega's Edge, a Coalition fleet moved to secure the system, expecting no resistance. Instead, human ships emerged from the asteroid belt. 30 outdated frigates patched together from wreckage, painted black to vanish in shadow. They struck without warning, ramming enemy cruisers, planting explosives, forcing boarding actions that devolved into savage close-quarters combat. The humans did not fight like the galaxy. They did not retreat when outnumbered. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought until their ships broke apart, until their lungs filled with vacuum, until every last bullet and drop of blood was spent. The Coalition destroyed them all, of course, but the cost was staggering. Dozens of ships lost, hundreds of soldiers dead. One admiral later whispered in a private council, "They fight as though death is victory." Stories like this spread quickly. In the barracks of alien soldiers, rumors grew. Humans were called monsters, demons, wraiths of the void. Soldiers claimed they saw human pilots smiling as they rammed into battleships, or Marines singing even as their bodies bled out in gravity wells. Fear seeped into the ranks of the Coalition. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. The galaxy had expected humans to crumble. Instead, humanity had become something new, something terrifying. Admiral Reyes was at the center of it. She commanded the remnants of the Indomitable's fleet, fewer than 100 ships scattered across a dozen systems. They were outnumbered 100 to 1, undersupplied and held together by nothing more than desperation and rage. And yet, under her command, they became something greater. Reyes rewrote every rule of war. She studied the Coalition's centuries-old doctrines and tore them apart. Where the galaxy valued honor, she embraced deception. Where the galaxy relied on overwhelming force, she used speed, surprise, and brutality. Her fleet became ghosts in the dark, appearing from nowhere, striking with surgical fury, then vanishing before the enemy could respond. They cut supply lines, sabotaged infrastructure, seeded colonies with resistant cells. Every battle was costly, but every battle carried a message. Humanity is not finished. But the cost of this transformation was steep. Humanity had to abandon what it once was. No longer were they builders, explorers, dreamers. They became survivors, predators, hunters. Children grew up in bunkers, learning to fight before they learned to read. Scientists abandoned peaceful research, pouring their genius into weapons that broke every galactic law of war. Soldiers lived on adrenaline and grief, sleeping with rifles in their arms, never expecting to see old age. Humanity hardened itself into iron, not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. Admiral Reyes saw this in her crew. She watched a young ensign, once a poet from Earth, calmly rig explosives to his own shuttle, volunteering for a suicide mission without hesitation. She listened as her officers debated tactics that guaranteed their own deaths, arguing over who would sacrifice themselves for the fleet's survival. And she carried the weight of every choice. Each life traded, each sacrifice made, etched deeper lines into her face. She no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. She was no longer a mother, no longer an officer. She was something else entirely, the embodiment of humanity's defiance. The Coalition responded with more terror. Worlds that resisted were obliterated from orbit. Civilians were executed en masse to send a message. Refugee fleets were hunted, their screams echoing through the void. The galaxy believed this would finally shatter humanity's will, but it had the opposite effect. For every atrocity, humanity answered with tenfold fury. Soldiers tattooed the names of slaughtered cities on their arms, vowing vengeance. Survivors carried soil from destroyed worlds, swearing never to rest until those worlds were avenged. Rage burned away despair, leaving only a cold, unyielding determination, and the galaxy learned to fear them. At the Battle of Solace Rift, Admiral Reyes led a trap that crippled an entire coalition fleet. Her ships hid within the debris of shattered moons, using the fragments as cover. When the coalition entered the system, Reyes sprung the trap. Mines detonated, debris fields weaponized, human ships striking from impossible angles. The battle cost her half her fleet. Thousands of humans died, but the coalition lost more than ships. They lost certainty. For the first time in galactic history, the United Armada wavered. Reports circulated through the Empire halls. Humans were not supposed to endure. And yet, even after the destruction of their colonies, the annihilation of their fleets, and the slaughter of their people, they fought harder than before. The galaxy had gathered to extinguish a flame. Instead, they had forged a blade. Admiral Reyes stood on the bridge after the battle, her body trembling with exhaustion, her heart aching with grief. But in her eyes burned something unbreakable. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. Humanity was fighting for vengeance. And though the galaxy did not yet understand it, the tide had begun to turn. For in the ashes of their ruin, humanity had become something the galaxy had not seen in millennia. A force that could not be broken. A storm that could not be stopped. A people forged in fire and iron. The war dragged on. What began as swift annihilation had become a slow, grinding conflict. To the galaxy, it made no sense. Humanity should have been erased within months. Yet here they were, years into the war, still alive, still fighting, still clawing at the vast machine arrayed against them. The coalition had underestimated something fundamental. They had thought humanity was like them, cautious, bound by tradition, afraid of loss. They had not understood that humans carried their dead with them into every battle. They had not understood that grief for humans was not paralysis but fuel. The galaxy was learning. And it was afraid. At first, the victories were small. A coalition supply convoy vanished in the Epsilon Belt, leaving a dozen worlds starving. A fuel depot in the Vayari sector exploded, taking half a fleet with it. In the Orion Spur, human raiders appeared from nowhere, striking like knives before vanishing into the black. Coalition leaders dismissed these as accidents, flukes, nuisances. But the reports grew, and with each one the whispers spread. The humans are still here. The humans cannot be killed. By the war's third year, those whispers became truth. Admiral Reyes stood in the war room of the rebuilt Indomitable, now more scrapyard than ship. Its halls patched with stolen alien metal, its guns a mismatched collection of scavenged weapons. She traced her finger across the star map, marking systems the coalition still held. Too many. Almost all. Her fleet was a shadow of what it had once been. Broken ships, half-trained recruits, soldiers carrying more scars than years. And yet they were no longer running. They were hunting. "Admiral," one of her commanders said, pointing at the map. "If we strike here, we can cripple the coalition's fuel lines. But we'll be outnumbered 10-1. Reyes studied him for a long moment. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but there was fire in him. Fire she had seen in every human who had survived this far. "Then we'll make 10 feel like 100, she said simply. And so humanity did what no species had ever dared. They fought the coalition not in defense, but in offense. Human fleets no longer hid on the edges of systems. They struck deep into the very heart of enemy space. They captured technology, stole supplies, turned the coalition's own weapons against them. Every battle was costly. Sometimes entire squadrons vanished, trading their lives for a single victory. But the victories mattered. The galaxy had never seen war fought this way. To the coalition, war was about preserving strength, minimizing losses, maintaining order. To humanity, war had become something else entirely, a contest of will, a brutal, unyielding refusal to die. The humans would throw everything into the fire, every ship, every soldier, every drop of blood, if it meant the enemy bled too. And the coalition, united in theory, began to fracture in practice. In the grand halls of the Val Primarch, alien leaders argued, "They are only humans." One shouted. "Their numbers dwindle with each passing month. This resistance is meaningless." "Meaningless?" Another countered. slamming a clawed hand on the table. "My fleets bleed more against them than against any foe in history. My soldiers refuse deployment. They speak of humans as demons. Even the youngest recruits tremble at the thought of facing them. They should not be feared," a third bellowed. "They should already be dead." But fear is not logic, and fear spreads faster than truth. One by one, empires began to question. Some quietly withdrew their fleets, unwilling to lose more lives for a war that should have ended years ago. Others sent weaker support, dragging their feet while humanity grew stronger. The unity that had once been absolute began to splinter. For humanity, these cracks were everything. Admiral Reyes seized every opportunity. Her fleet struck hardest at the wavering empires, forcing them into retreats they could no longer justify. On colony after colony, survivors rose from the ashes, joining the resistance in whatever way they could. Farmers carried rifles. Children carried messages. Entire worlds became fortresses, daring the coalition to try and take them again. Even in defeat, humanity learned. A failed ambush one month became a flawless trap the next. A lost battle taught new tactics, new weapons, new ways to bleed the enemy. Humanity adapted faster than the coalition could respond. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. Reyes often returned to her quarters alone, staring at the single photograph she kept of her son. His face was frozen in youth, forever 20, forever gone. She spoke to him in whispers, telling him of every victory, every defeat. She told him humanity was still alive, that his death had not been in vain. She carried him with her into every battle. Just as every soldier carried someone lost, someone loved, someone whose memory made their hands steadier, their aim truer, their will harder than steel. This was what the galaxy had never understood. They believed grief was weakness. But for humans, grief was a weapon sharper than any blade. The war had become something new. Once it had been the galaxy united against a single world. Now it was a contest of endurance. Who could outlast the storm? Who could suffer more? Who could bear the unbearable? The coalition had numbers, technology, centuries of tradition. Humanity had only pain, rage, and will. And in the black void between stars, that was enough. For the galaxy was beginning to realize a terrifying truth. Humanity was not merely surviving. Humanity was winning. Admiral Reyes stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, older now, her hair streaked with gray, her uniform frayed from years of war. She no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. Gone was the officer who once dreamed of exploration, of colonies blossoming on alien worlds. What remained was a weapon, honed, sharpened, unyielding, and before her stretched the largest fleet she had ever seen. The coalition had gathered everything it had for one last strike. Thousands of ships drawn from every empire, forming a wall of steel and firepower that blotted out the stars. This was not a battle. It was an execution, a final attempt to crush the humans once and for all. Her fleet was a fraction of their size. Broken ships patched with alien metal, crews half-starved, veterans scarred by battles too numerous to count. Yet Reyes felt no fear, only a cold certainty. She turned to her officers, their faces hollow yet fierce. "This is it," she said. "They think we're weak. They think we'll finally break. But we're not here to survive." She paused, her voice like iron. "We're here to end it." The battle began with silence. Two fleets facing one another across the void, engines burning cold, weapons primed. For a moment, even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Then the galaxy opened fire. The coalition unleashed storms of plasma and missiles, weapons that had annihilated worlds. The void lit with fire. Entire human squadrons vanished in seconds. But humanity did not retreat. They advanced. Reyes gave no orders for defense. Instead, she gave one command: forward. Human ships surged into the storm, weaving through impossible gaps, striking with reckless fury. Fighters rammed into battleships, tearing open their hulls. Frigates overloaded reactors to detonate within enemy formations. Boarding parties launched from shattered vessels, tearing their way inside cruisers with nothing but rifles and rage. The coalition fought with precision. Humanity fought with madness, and madness, it turned out, was deadlier. The enemy expected surrender. Instead, they found themselves bleeding. For every human ship destroyed, 3 of theirs fell. For every Marine killed, 10 coalition soldiers screamed their last. Admiral Reyes directed the battle like a conductor of chaos, every loss a note in her symphony of vengeance. When a destroyer captain reported he could not hold, she told him, "Then die loud enough for them to hear you." He did. The explosion crippled a dreadnought. For hours the void burned. The galaxy's greatest fleet began to fracture under the relentless assault. Discipline wavered. Orders faltered. Fear spread. And then the moment came. The Val flagship, centerpiece of the coalition fleet, turned away. It was not retreat at first, only a maneuver, a repositioning. But others noticed. A dozen escorts followed. Then another Empire's ships faltered, unwilling to die beside the Val. Then another. The coalition was not one empire. It was many, bound not by loyalty but by fear of humanity's rise. Fear united them, and fear now tore them apart. "Admiral," her lieutenant whispered, awe in his voice. "They're breaking." Reyes said nothing. She only watched as the greatest armada in galactic history began to collapse. The slaughter turned into rout. Human ships, bleeding and burning, chased the fleeing fleets, tearing into them with fury born of centuries of loss. The galaxy that had once hunted Earth now scattered like prey. And then it happened. One by one, ships began transmitting surrender codes. First a cruiser, then a squadron, then entire fleets. The signals came in waves, filling the comms with a chorus of voices begging for mercy from the very species they had once sought to erase. The bridge of the Indomitable fell silent. Officers stared at Reyes, disbelief etched into their faces. After years of fire and ash, after billions of deaths, after a war that should have ended humanity, the galaxy knelt. Reyes closed her eyes. She thought of her son, lost in the first months of the war. She thought of every name carved into her soul, and she whispered, so soft only she could hear, "We did it." When the surrender was formalized, the galaxy's rulers bent their heads before the human delegation. The same voices that had once sworn humanity's destruction now spoke words of submission. But there was no triumph in humanity's eyes. Only exhaustion. Only scars. Reyes stood before the assembly, her presence as sharp as the edge of a blade. "You came to destroy us," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "You united to erase us. You believed we would kneel." She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the bowed figures of emperors and kings. "But it is you who kneel now." The hall was silent. No one dared look her in the eye. Reyes turned and walked away, leaving them to their shame. The war was over. Humanity had not merely survived. Humanity had shattered the greatest coalition in galactic history, and the galaxy, once united against Earth, now trembled before it. The war had ended, but the silence it left behind was deafening. For the first time in years, the skies above Earth were free of enemy fire. No ships blotted out the sun, no bombs fell upon cities. Instead, the world sat beneath a strange quiet, broken only by the whispers of wind through ruins and the laughter of children who had known nothing but war. Earth was alive. Battered, scarred, grieving, but alive. Admiral Reyes walked through the broken streets of Madrid, a city once home to millions. Now weeds pushed through cracked pavement and hollowed towers stood like ghosts. Families gathered in the rubble, cooking over fires, rebuilding brick by brick. She saw men with missing limbs carrying beams of wood. She saw mothers with eyes still raw from tears teaching their children to read by candlelight. This was humanity's true strength, she realized. Not ships, not weapons, not strategy, but this. The refusal to give in, the instinct to rebuild, the stubborn defiance of despair. The galaxy had seen humans fight. Now they would see humans rise. Across alien worlds, news spread like wildfire. The coalition had surrendered. The invincible fleet was gone. Empires that once ruled with arrogance now bowed their heads in shame. And at the center of it all stood Earth, the world that would not die. On a dozen alien broadcasts, Reyes's words were replayed. But it is you who kneel now. To the conquered species of the galaxy, those words were not a threat. They were a promise. Humanity had shown that even the smallest voice could defy giants. Hope spread where none had existed before, but hope carried fear as well. The galaxy now saw humans as something beyond comprehension. Not gods, not monsters, something stranger. A people who turned grief into fire, who wielded loss as a weapon, who could not be broken even when all logic said they should be. And so the galaxy trembled, not because humanity had conquered, but because humanity had endured. In the ruins of the Coalition's Grand Hall, now abandoned, a single banner remained, not of empire nor of conquest, but of Earth. A patchwork flag sewn from scraps of uniforms, carried through every battle by soldiers who had refused to let it fall. Reyes stood before it, alone. She thought of her son, of every face she had lost, of every voice silenced by the war. Victory had not brought them back. No triumph could. And yet she felt them here, in every stone rebuilt, in every child who laughed, in every soldier who still stood. They lived on, not as ghosts, but as echoes carried in the hearts of the living. She reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric. "We did it," she whispered again. But this time it was not to the dead. It was to the living. To the future. Humanity faced choices now. Some cried for vengeance, for the chance to turn their tormentors into slaves. Others demanded peace, a chance to end the cycle before it consumed them all. The debates raged as fierce as any battle. Reyes listened to them all, but in her heart she knew the truth. Humanity could not become what they had fought against. If they did, then all the sacrifice, all the suffering would be meaningless. Earth had not survived to rule. Earth had survived to endure. To remind the stars that no empire, no fleet, no weapon could ever erase the human spirit. One evening, Reyes walked the rebuilt streets of New York. Children played in the shadows of ruined skyscrapers, their laughter carrying into the dusk. A boy ran past her carrying a wooden sword, shouting, "I'm a soldier of Earth. You can't beat me." For the first time in years, Reyes smiled. The boy's voice was not angry, not vengeful, only proud. And in that moment she understood. Humanity's true victory was not in making the galaxy kneel. It was in ensuring that their children could stand tall. Centuries from now, empires would rise and fall. New wars would come. New enemies would test the stars. But the memory of Earth's defiance would never fade. They would remember the world that stood alone against all the heavens. They would remember the people who turned sorrow into steel. They would remember that when the galaxy united to destroy humanity, it was the galaxy that broke, not Earth. And when they whispered humanity's name, they would whisper it with awe. Admiral Reyes returned to her ship one final time. The Indomitable was no longer a weapon of war. It had become a symbol, a monument of scars and survival. She stood upon its deck, looking out at the stars, and felt no fear. The galaxy was vast, the future uncertain, but humanity had proven itself. Not because it had conquered, but because it had endured the unendurable and still remained. The stars seemed to bow before her. Or perhaps, she thought, they had always bowed before humanity's spirit, waiting for the day it would reveal itself. Reyes closed her eyes. Her voice, barely more than a whisper, carried into the void. "We are humanity. We endure and we rise." The galaxy listened, and it would never forget.